All right, well, thank you so very much for joining our recorded version of our weekly financial meeting. And for those of us who experienced our technical difficulties, I deeply, deeply apologize. On the call right now for this recorded version is myself, Catherine Ruiz. I am the ambulance rates analyst with the Bureau of EMS and Trauma. We have Jason Taylor from the City of Mesa and Paul Patterson from Anderson Ambulance of Douglas. So we have some information that we wanted to present to the stakeholders from the state of Arizona that would be beneficial to them regarding the COVID-19 crisis. I'm sure on the updated agenda, some of you noticed that we did have a presenter who had to cancel for us, Shivani Dubey from Small Business Administration, SBA. I do have some information to provide regarding that. So if you are joining us specifically for that, I do ask that you wait till the end and you will see that information. So without further ado, we'll kick it off. Paul, if you please.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'm sure everybody's wondering, why is this guy from Southern Arizona on this conference? And the reason is that I sit on the board of the American Ambulance Association. And as a part of doing that, I'm also on our COVID-19 subcommittee. And we meet every Monday morning with colleagues from across the country. So I'm getting a pretty good feed for what's happening nationally, as well as insights as to what's going on, not only in the Congress, but at CMS. So I'm going to address some of those things. The first thing I want to talk about is call volumes. I don't know about you all, but I suspect you're in the same boat that I am in that we're down about a third, about 33% of our call volume. We've been down since this thing started up. And obviously that has implications. In talking to, again, my colleagues across the country, that's pretty much the case around the country, between 25% and 50% decrease in both 911 and inter-facility calls. And on a lot of the 911 calls, they're getting an inordinate amount of patient refusals, so they're dry runs. So, that's going to have a financial impact on all of us because we're paid retrospectively. We're going to see that decrease in revenue stream coming up pretty soon, probably. That's just kind of overview what's happening around the country and in my little world. So I want to touch on some Medicare, Medicaid issues. These are coming out of CMS. At the Ambulance Association, we have several contractors who have inroads into CMS and have visibility in the director's office on down. So that's where some of this is coming from. First thing I'll touch on is the 2% sequestration adjustment. That came about, a 2% reduction in our Medicare reimbursements. Was it a couple of years ago when the Congress went into sequestration, and that's never been replaced? It has been temporarily during the COVID-19 disaster declaration. So we'll be seeing a little bump in our Medicare reimbursements. Another topic is the alternate destinations. The CMS has approved us taking patients to other than hospitals for care, and will reimburse for that during the COVID-19 emergency. That's kind of a big deal. Another thing that's important to all of us is the concept of treat in place. And I don't know what's happening in your areas, but around the country, a lot of ambulance services are actually treating in place. They'll get a call that's related to COVID-19, respond and assess the patient, of course, talk to the hospital, and determine that it's appropriate for that patient to stay at home. We don't get reimbursed for that. Nobody around the country does. CMS has not addressed that issue yet. We're still not getting paid for those. I can assure you that the AAA is working very hard to get that change made, at least for this, if not going into the future. Another really kind of a sensitive issue is patient signatures. We don't want people touching our pens or our tablets or whatever, and vice versa. So CMS finally, after several weeks, agreed that patient signatures aren't required on our run reports. What a lot of people are doing is just putting COVID-19, the date, and then also you should note who was authorizing you to write that down, either the patient, family member, whatever. So be sure and note that on your care reports. And the last thing I have is on FEMA programs. As everybody knows, there are a number of programs that came out of the CARES Act, SBA programs, FEMA programs, etc. Some are for public sector providers, some are for private sector providers. On the fire side, there are grants available through the U.S. Fire Administration, and you can find out information on them at www.usfa.fema.gov. And there's a page there or a link there to grant opportunities from FEMA for fire departments. Catherine?
Thank you so very much, Paul. And yes, we do have that website there on our agenda as well. There is quite a few opportunity when it comes to FEMA, so I definitely would recommend those who qualify to look into what programs those can assist our providers with. And that might be regarding utilities, lease, supply. That website that Paul gave us has quite a lot of different items that even I didn't consider being specific to, but it definitely is relevant. Okay, so Jason, if you will.
Sure, and I'll just kind of continue down the line with some of these relief packages, leaving off or picking up from where Paul left off. The first one I want to mention is the Accelerated and Advanced Payment Program. This is actually nothing new. It's existed in the past, but there are a couple changes to it that I'll address. What it is that program is essentially a short-term loan, or basically an advance to shore up short-term cash flow crunches that providers might be experiencing. It's based on a 2-page application, and the provider can borrow up to 3 months of future Medicare claim payments. That's where I'm saying it's essentially an advance. So you basically, once you complete that application, if it's approved, you'll receive payment on those downstream claims within 7 days. And that used to be, this is the big change. It used to be that an applicant had to wait 3 to 4 weeks to get that advance, and now they're doing it within 7 days. And I think I was reading that it's more like 3 or 4 days. So what happens is you get that advance, and then 120 days later, that's when you have to start repaying that. So it is a loan, and you repay it kind of automatically through what they call recoupments. And that's where Medicare basically, instead of sending you a check for one of those downstream claims, they recoup that advance that they had already given you. And the whole loan is due in full within 210 days of that the start of the repayment period. There is a 2-page application that's on Noridian's website. So if you go to their website, there's a big banner at the top of it, COVID-19 in yellow. And we are in Arizona jurisdiction JFB. You click that link, and then there's another link once you click that, and it's COVID-19 advance payment. And you click on that, and it's a fillable PDF, I believe. Again, just 2 pages. The one thing that I did hear on the AAA's webinar was that some MACs have been somewhat overzealous about disallowing this advance if there are outstanding refunds. So we know that in our business there's overpayment sometimes, and we need to turn around and refund those. And that's kind of a normal part of the process. But according to the AAA, if you give your MAC or Noridian in our case a call and get that cleared up, then it should eliminate problems with this program. I do want to, for more detail on this, because you can get into the weeds quite a bit with this. Catherine put together a Cliff's Notes that she sent out with the meeting invite, and that has a lot more detail as far as the ins and outs of this program. But the takeaway for right now is it is basically a short-term loan or advance to help with cash flow crunches that you do have to pay back. Kind of the bigger deal is the next agenda item. This is the CARES Act Provider Relief Fund. I have heard this one confused me, because I've heard it called the HHS stimulus, HHS grants, public health and social service emergency fund grants. Lots of names, but what I'm talking about is that sizable check that suddenly was deposited in your account this week from Optum Bank, referencing the US HHS stimulus. So if you're like us, we're kind of taken aback at how quickly this came in. But the gist of it is the CARES Act included $100 billion in grants for hospitals and other providers to offset the negative financial impacts of COVID-19. And this payment that we received this week, it was the distribution of the first 30 billion of that 100 billion that they intend to dole out. It's pretty broad. If you follow the links in the email that notified you of that payment, it has the terms and conditions. And again, and I'm going to pause real quick and come clean. Most of my knowledge on this came from the AAA webinar that was posted on April 10th. And I would recommend that everyone watch that webinar. They did an excellent job, laid things out pretty concisely. So I'm just boiling this down in a nutshell. But the consultants who posted that webinar, they referenced eligible uses such as increased staffing, PPE, temporary structures or retrofitting equipment or facilities. And the big one that caught my ear was using it to replenish the lost revenue from the decreased run volume that Paul referenced at the beginning of this webinar. So even obviously with COVID-19, like Paul referenced, you've got people who just aren't calling 911, who don't want to be transported after they called because they're worried about getting contaminated. But this is apparently eligible for that lost revenue. And the reason for that is that one of the primary objectives of the CARES Act is trying to limit layoffs and staffing reductions. So the one thing that they did caution on that webinar, though, is that we still need to be careful not to double dip with other funding sources. So while the terms and conditions leave it pretty broad, what we can use that money for, the key is to continue to document what you're using that for through reporting codes or other accounting tracking mechanisms. And I would say always be prepared for an audit down the line when this is all cleared up. Other pieces of this is just for housekeeping. It's critical that you accept the terms and conditions within 30 days of receiving those funds. They just opened the portal for that, I think today. So I was able to go in there and took about 5-10 minutes to read and sign off on those terms and conditions. And then you get a receipt saying you did that. And all of this is on the link that's on the agenda. Actually, for both these agenda items, the Accelerated and Advanced Payment Program, there's a link on that. And for the CARES Act, there's a link on that agenda item. And again, for the CARES Act funding, the email that you were sent has a link, and that should really serve as a hub. There's multiple other links in there, for example, to that, the terms and conditions in that payment portal, so that you can meet those housekeeping requirements. Finally on this, the priorities for the remaining 70 billion of that 100 billion is apparently still in the works. The administration is apparently focusing on providers in rural areas, anyone who was more specifically impacted by COVID-19, and then some providers with lower shares of Medicare reimbursement. So I think we still have some time to see where that remaining 70 billion gets allocated. And that wraps it up for my area.
Jason, if I can add to something you just said about the CARES Act and those remaining dollars, the AAA is working very hard, very diligently and is asking for a distribution in the amount of $48,000 per ambulance be made to all services across the country. So, keep your fingers crossed for that.
Excellent point. Thank you.
And to go ahead and talk about the cliff notes that I created, if we could display those again. There was a previous error that I had where I had parts A and B mixed up. Part B that Jason was talking about, you do have that 210 days to pay off, which it does say in this version. Part A, if you're Medicare Part A, they have a year. So on the prior version that I emailed out, I got the two of them mixed up. So Part A has about a year. Part B has 120 days. So just as an FYI, in case you have an older version in front of you, I apologize. That is my bad. Last but not least, we had Shivani, who is going to give us on the agenda. She's going to give us some information about SBA. So her information is there. I'm going to relay to you just broad strokes about what she was going to present. You might be following the news, and as of last night at approximately 7 p.m., SBA had released a media notice stating that they were not accepting any new loans regarding these two programs due to the fact that the funding for it was exhausted. And if you're following the news, SBA is asking the federal government for a second infusion of cash to reactivate these programs, which is why I want to give you broad strokes about what they are. They might be the same, they might be a little bit different, but either way, I wanted to give you an idea as to what they are so that you're not surprised once SBA does get that second infusion of cash. It is expected. So once SBA gets that second infusion, I would recommend you use this information that you have, call Shivani right away and see what it is that she can help you with. So I'm going to give you what these programs are, because that's what our hope is that they're just going to be reactivated word for word exactly how they are. The first is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, EIDL. It's called EIDL for short. And at no cost to apply, and you're not obligated to go with EIDL if you do apply for the loan and are approved. It's not intended for lost sales or profits or expansion. And the SBA will determine the amount that you're approved for based upon the application information that you provide. It must be used for fixed debts. And those fixed debts can be retroactively back from January of 2020. It's 3.75 fixed for a small business and 2.75 for a private nonprofit. Loans can be up to $2 million based upon, again, what information you provide, and no payments for 12 months. Now, through SBA, this would be for for-profit, nonprofit, and some tribals, depending upon classification, depending on also on size. Obviously, for-profit, the Small Business Administration, they'd expect to be a small business. The second part is the Payroll Protection Program, also called the PPP. And you can't claim the same items that you claimed under EIDL under the Payroll Protection Program. Just like how Jason and Paul just stated, you can't double dip. So whatever you claim under the SBA loans, you can't also claim under FEMA, and you cannot claim under the CARES Act. You got to be sure that whatever it is that you claim for just that entity and that entity alone. Now, the PPP is retroactive to February 15th of 2020. Loans are due to be fully forgiven. If 75% of that loan is for payroll, that's the portion that's forgiven, 25% for other expenses. So you can see why this was very popular. That's for payroll. It can be for payroll service fees, health plans, PTO, sick time, payroll taxes, unemployment insurance taxes, etc. The rate for this was 1%. No collateral. First payments were deferred for 6 months. So these are the programs that we're hoping will be instituted back online. And again, for those people who qualify, this would be very valuable. So follow the news, see if it gets reinstated. If SBA gets that second wave of money, it should. And once they get that second wave of money, that PPP program was done through banks, though. That had to be done through your own bank. The EIDL loan, the previous one I talked about, was done through SBA. So when in doubt, call Shivani. Let's follow, make sure that we get that second wave of money. And once that second wave of money is approved, then that is applicable to everybody. Now, we have a resource page that I made that kind of flashed a little bit earlier that had the different resources for different types of entities. If we could, the COVID funding. Thank you very much. So depending upon the type of entity you are, these are the different types of opportunities that are available to you. Now, there's a few footnotes at the bottom that state different types of items that could withhold you from being eligible. So like the SBA, you have to be a small business. So if you're for profit, but you're not a small business, then obviously that wouldn't be applicable to you. But some of those little footnotes do classify and clarify which you would be eligible for and which that you wouldn't. So, and I've got contact information there for you. I will say Noridian answered their phone quite quickly when I did call. CMS is very, very available. FEMA, the phone numbers that are listed, if you call them, it goes directly to a recording that tells you to send an email. So unfortunately, those phone numbers are really not good anyway. The emails are the best availability there. For SBA, Shivani is very quick to respond to emails. She is out of the office at this time, so like everybody else, so I would recommend sending an email. So I hope that is helpful. The last thing that we made was a resource listing, and that had resources when it came to FEMA and when it came to CMS. So there's the main document, document A and document B, which are the head documents, and then documents that are supporting of that. I have links there for you that tell you what's what and where I got them so that you know what came from where. Since some of them for CMS are ambulance waivers specific to ambulance and hospitals only, rural waivers specific to rural areas only. And then same thing for FEMA. You've got FEMA's main webpage and all the additional information as well that goes with that. And I've got links is where I found everything so that you could be able to find everything on your own if need be. So I hope this was helpful. We intend to continue having this type of call and hopefully not the technological issues, being that everything is changing so rapidly. Just like SBA, this happened last night at 7 p.m. So as things change, we are definitely here to try to gather all the information that we can. And that AAA webinar that was mentioned earlier, that website was sent out to everyone. So if you'd like to go see that, that is an on-demand webinar. So you can see it at your leisure, at your pleasure. Any other information that can be provided to us so that we can disseminate that to everybody else would be appreciated, whether or not that be resources, whether or not that be clarifications, questions, workarounds, whatever the case might be, since everyone here is dealing with the same type of problem. I don't want to say the same problem because no, not everyone has the same problem, but we're all dealing with the same type of problem. So we want to help each other as best we can. So with that, if you have any other questions, feel free to send one to my email or several to my email, or resources, send them to my email. We hope to have a Q&A session live so that we can go through this together. And we hope that next time we have the next meeting, we can also host it live and not have technical difficulties. And again, I apologize for that. With that, anything else to add, gentlemen?
Nothing here.
All right, there's an email that was listed down below on the bottom of the agenda, emscovid@azdhs.gov. So if you have general COVID questions relating to emergency management services, feel free to send it to that. We also have a web page that has a whole bunch of other resources and information as well too for EMS providers. So that hyperlink at the bottom of the agenda below, feel free to check that out. So thank you so very much. Again, I apologize we couldn't be live. Next time.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
For your help. I greatly appreciate it.